This is 9/11 Freefall.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I'm the host, Andy Steele, and Merry Christmas. This show is airing on Christmas night 2014. I'm happy to be joining you in the audience and that you guys are listening on Christmas or listening in the archives or whatever. I don't have a guest tonight. I thought I'd take this opportunity to catch all of you up in the latest news related to 9/11 truth and other issues that branch off from 9/11 truth. So before I get to that, we're going to do what we do every week. We're going to take 10 seconds of silence to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and all the people who died in the wars that followed 9/11. We'll do that starting now. And that is 10 seconds.
When I was a child, I do believe we decorated the house on Christmas Eve with trinkets and tropical fruit. For you see, in the islands we had not a Christmas tree.
Seguimos en Cristo, seguimos en Cristo, seguimos en Cristo. It's Christmas in the tropics.
The stockings were hung on the bedpost tree, for nobody in the island had a chimney. When all of our Christmas prayers were said, then off we would go to be tucked into bed. We go to church early on Christmas morn to hear how the Holy Child was born. Everybody was solemn to a fine degree until the vicar pronounced the doxology.
Seguimos en Cristo, seguimos en Cristo, seguimos en Cristo. It's Christmas in the tropics.
The people come from far and near with rice and pea and ginger beer. Then we shake the hand of we fellow man and wish ye all the happiness we can. Everybody come down to the marketplace, all the gals dress up in their silk and lace. Real calypso sing by the mandolin when it's Christmas Day in the Caribbean.
Seguimos en Cristo, seguimos en Cristo, seguimos en Cristo. It's Christmas in the tropics.
The marketplace, it look mighty fine with decoration of many kind. The concert band will play many a tune, then the fireworks come in the afternoon. The rum and coconut water flow among the rich and the poor, the high and low. Old Santa Claus, he look mighty cute in a Panama hat and white linen suit.
Seguimos en Cristo, seguimos en Cristo, seguimos en Cristo. It's Christmas in the tropics. Seguimos en Cristo, seguimos en Cristo, seguimos en Cristo. It's Christmas in the tropics.
So I hope everyone's having a good Christmas night and you guys are all safe. And since it is Christmas, I guess it is appropriate for me to say something about the holiday. It's hard to relate Christmas to the topic we talk about every week, which is the fact that buildings 1, 2, and 7 of the World Trade Center were brought down in controlled demolitions that day. And of course, regular listeners of the show know that we've brought on expert after expert talking about this, talking about the science that proves this, the undeniable fact that this is what happened on that day, and that we have a major media cover-up going on in this country, that we have a tremendous brick wall to get past and trying to get any of our people in our government to do anything about it. So I was thinking just about myself and doing some personal introspection this week. The fact that this holiday always sneaks up on me, and there's always certain responsibilities that come to me on this holiday, particularly because I have an aging mother and she tries her hardest to put on a good meal on Christmas Eve night for the family, but a lot of it always relies on me to go out and get stuff for her because she doesn't like to drive in the snow, and it's usually always snowing on Christmas in this area each year. And for some reason, I'm the only person who can get the fish. I don't know why. She's got this in her head that I'm the only person capable of going out and buying the fish every year. She always tells me I do such a great job at it. I don't know what great job I do. But again, these things always sneak up on me, and I'm always trying to get these things done at the last minute. And the reason is because it's hard for me to get into the holiday. It's hard for me to get into Christmas. I'm not a big fan of it. This is not something that I enjoy all that much. And I wonder why that is. Why is that? What about me in Christmas don't get along? And I'm not saying I hate it. I'm not the Grinch here. I'm not Ebenezer Scrooge. It's just it doesn't really do much for me. And so why is that? You know, a lot of people I know get into it. And part of it was probably not having children. I don't have any kids to do the whole Santa Claus build up and excitement with. But also, too, it's some of the consequences that the values that have been placed on Christmas have on our society. You know, I brought it up on Thanksgiving, the fact that I don't like Black Friday. I think it's absolutely irresponsible for the corporations to get everyone all frenzied and create these zombie mobs that come rushing into the stores at midnight. I don't think it's right. People get injured, and it doesn't bring out the best in our people. And also, too, how people get stressed out over Christmas, and they get themselves in debt. I mean, I've heard people go through these diatribes about, you know, should they go get this present for this person, or they'll think this and that, and it's just, you know, they get themselves into tremendous debt, as if caring for your family and doing the right thing equates to how much money you spend on some gift. And again, people are just doing this to match each other, and the only people who win in the end are the stores. And relating this to 9/11 Truth, because 9/11 Truth, waking up to the scientific evidence of the controlled demolitions in New York, for a lot of people is the first domino to fall. We talked about it last week when Richard Gage and Kelly David were on the show. Why this is such an important issue, because it's the issue that lets you know there are serious issues in America. And people say, well, I realize that there's issues in America. No, I'm not talking about the issues that the news media has decided it's okay for you to know about, for you to debate about. I'm talking about the real issues. The real issues that let you know that America, its government, is not necessarily what you think it is. Our place on the good guy ladder is not necessarily where we think we stand. It's not on the rung that we have put ourselves on, seemingly above everybody else. Issues that most of us don't even dwell on, don't even think about it. And I guess that's why I have such a problem with this time of the year. I mean, all the sentiments that come with Christmas sound good. You know, the stuff they used to put on TV. But the reality is not the same, because while people are stressing out and putting themselves in debt buying crap, essentially, and the stores are winning out in the end, they're ignoring the reality of what's going on the outside world and on the outside of the bubble that they live in. Same thing goes with football, which is, I always considered this to be a big part of the holiday, of any holiday in the winter. When I was growing up, believe it or not, people don't believe this about me because the way I am now, but I used to be really into that. When I was in high school, I was all into the football. Big Kansas City Chiefs fan for some reason. Don't know why. I grew up in upstate New York, but for some reason, it's like falling in love. You can't help it. You can't, a lot of times, have any control over it, which team you decide to give your affection to. But I would have my weeks live or die based on what my team did. And I hear people now, and they talk to each other so expertly about what this team is doing and that team is doing and who they're trading and what's going to happen next week and what the math of what some team that's doing kind of so-so the season, what the math of what it would take for them to get into the playoffs. I mean, people rattle this off like they're PhDs at this. And I'm not against fun things. I'm not against enjoying life and enjoying a sport. But when people just tune out the outside world, when people tune out important things like the controlled demolition evidence on 9/11 and replace it with this inane, meaningless game, you begin to resent that game. It's like somebody who may have been raised by an alcoholic mother, an alcoholic single mother. You know, your average person will have nothing against alcohol in itself, going out and partying, drinking responsibly, right? But when you've grown up in a situation where you were a kid and you were in need of something, and your mother was passed out on the couch or out just completely off her rocker drunk, and you found yourself having to deal with a lot of the household stuff, getting dinner cooked, getting the house cleaned, making sure that your younger siblings got their homework done, you begin to resent alcohol. Now, deep down, you might resent your mother and her alcoholism. That might be the root cause of it, but on a superficial level, you resent the actual item, the drink, the booze. And so I guess this is how I feel about all of this holiday materialism and how I feel about football, too. The fact that people just turn off the world and get lost in this stuff that's ultimately meaningless. I mean, especially with the football. I remember Jerry Seinfeld had a joke. People getting excited about sports and saying when their team wins the championship, you know, we won. No, they won, you watched. It's a show. I mean, even if you don't know what the outcome is going to be because it's a contest, it's still just a show. It means nothing. It doesn't have any impact on your world. And I guess this is why I have such a problem getting excited about this stuff every year, because it's a distraction. It's phony. People don't live up to the ideals of the holiday. We're told the ideals of the holiday are. Especially with everything that's coming out now. I was going to get to this later, but we'll get to it now. We had the torture report come out. The Senate torture report on the CIA. What they were doing. And how does this relate to 9/11 truth? Well, people justify this torture based off of the 9/11 official story. Problem is that the majority of people are not getting a large chunk of the 9/11 story. They're not hearing that there were explosives in the buildings. They're not hearing about the nanothermite in the dust. They don't know that there's more to 9/11 than what they've been told. So essentially, whereas people may have questioned this, may have questioned what this does to our role in the world before, may have questioned whether or not we're these kinds of people, on 9/11 and in the years afterwards, our media and government establishment, with the official story, took a big hook and stuck it up the nose of collective America and pulled its brain out. Or you could say it lobotomized them. And it upsets me. It's hard to hold my tongue. Sometimes it's discretion is the greater part of valor, but I was walking by a couple of people this week, and I heard this woman say, well, I heard it was an old man and a somewhat younger middle-aged woman. And the old man said something like, oh, they're all animals. They're all animals anyway. So my ears perk up because I'm wondering who's animals. And I hear the woman say, I know, and they all this flack about torture, but if it gets good intelligence, why not? And see, people who live in these bubbles of Christmas and football think that they're experts. You know, they watch Jack Bauer, they think they are him. They can say this. Like they actually know something. You know, the problem with that statement, and as the Senate report is confirming, is that it doesn't lead to good intelligence. All right? Because, first of all, you're waterboarding somebody. They're going to say whatever you want to hear to make the waterboarding stop. Or if you're threatening to kill their children or to sexually abuse their mother. This is the stuff that was in the report. You're going to say anything to prevent that from happening. You're going to, even if you were born in the 1980s, you're going to confess to killing JFK. even though it happened before you were born, just to make the torture end. So it's not good intelligence. It doesn't lead to finding out the source of plots or whatnot. All it could succeed in is possibly getting people to confess to crimes they didn't commit, so you can create patsies for a crime that you yourself committed if you're the torturer. And again, we don't get into those broader issues with 9/11, but knowing this, because again, the government's not stupid. The CIA is not stupid. They're not a bunch of adults. They know this. All right? If Andy Steele knows this, people at the CIA know this. So then the question is, why are they doing this? Now, if you go to John Michael Talbot's website, which is 911debunkers.blogspot.com, he has got a great article posted titled, "No one is reading the CIA torture report, so we turned it into 11 fun memes." I think it's pronounced memes. I'm always confused as to whether or not it's memes or memes. So, flipping a coin here, I think it's memes. Correct me if I'm wrong. But he's just got different pictures of George Bush talking to various people, doing little thumbs up with them, posing with pictures, and then there's words from the torture report in there. Like the first one here, it says, "During a waterboarding session, one detainee became completely unresponsive with bubbles rising through his open, full mouth." It also says, in 2002, a detainee died of hypothermia while held partially naked and chained to a floor. At least 5 CIA detainees were subjected to rectal rehydration or rectal feeding without documented medical necessity. And here we go with this. 1 in 5 detainees were wrongfully held and tortured due to bad intelligence. This is one I can apply to Christmas. Remember that movie, The Christmas Story, where the boy who wants the BB gun? And the whole movie is about him being obsessed with getting the BB gun. They show it like over and over again on some channel every year, like 24/7 on Christmas. So if you haven't seen it, it's a good movie. But at one point, I think the kid gets in trouble because he says the F word, and the mom is making him sit there with soap in his mouth. This is a punishment. So to get himself out of trouble, because the mom keeps on demanding that he say where he heard that word, and the kid heard it from the father, but he doesn't want to say that, so he just fingers another kid in his class. He basically says it was this other kid. So the mom goes to the phone and calls that kid's mom, and then the kid's getting a beating. It's humorous because it's a fictional movie. The kid's getting a beating on the phone for something he didn't even do, because this other kid was being well tortured. He had soap in his mouth. Kid torture. All right, now apply this to the real world. Apply this to geopolitics. All right, someone is being tortured. They want to make the torture stop. They'll start naming names. They'll start coming up with people that had nothing to do with anything, any plots that the CIA is perceiving against America. This actually happened. This is from an article, 5 appalling takeaways from the Senate CIA torture report. And number 5, it says the CIA tortured innocent people, including accidentally its own informants, and it killed at least 1 detainee. And it points out how there were people that were grabbed up who did nothing, who did absolutely nothing. And this is important to note. Right now there's an article out there essentially pointing out, we always say we're not these kinds of people, but actually, at this point we are. We may not have been those kinds of people, but at what point do you just say, no, this is what America stands for now? This is who we've become. Because people change. People's personalities change as well. America's personality can change. We're not the same people that we saw in those black and white photographs of old family members with the big church hats and all of that. At some point you got to acknowledge this is what America's become, and partially, mainly because of the official 9/11 story. Because 9/11 is used to justify this. It is the basis with which ordinary nice people, soccer moms, factory workers, bus drivers, grandmas and grandpas, It's the basis with which they say statements like, well, if it produces good intelligence, do what you got to do. But see, even their intelligence, personal intelligence on the world situation is flawed because they haven't gotten a full part of the story. They're not allowed to hear about the controlled demolition evidence. Or if they hear about it, the media has done a great job of jumping in front of those who talk about it, the experts like Stephen Jones, Richard Gage, all of them, jumping in front of them saying, well, don't listen to them, they're just conspiracy theorists. It's just like Pavlov's dogs. Conspiracy theorist is just a little bell that gets rung. When someone says that, it's like ringing a little bell, but instead of drooling, it just makes people turn their brains off. Makes them liquefy their brains. And they don't want to hear it. Because they want to feel like they're part of the winning team, the in-group. I mean, the high school mentality doesn't end just because you become an old person and get gray hair. It actually becomes more magnified. All of the pressure, peer pressure, because then money becomes involved. And a lot of times your career depends on whether or not you can fit into a certain situation. And for everybody, even if it's some job not related to government or academia, for a lot of jobs, a lot of professions, people don't want to be the person around the water cooler saying, I think this is wrong because, first of all, 9/11, there was buildings in New York were brought down in a controlled demolition. I watched this documentary proving that. A lot of people don't yet have the courage to stand out and say that. So this is what 9/11 created. This is the situation that we now find ourselves in, 13 years after the event took place. And talking about Christmas again, relating it to the holiday that we're celebrating today, and all of this denial. Now, I think back to the episode in which Jonathan Cole was on, and he had this great analogy. He called it the Santa Claus analogy. Well, I don't know if he calls it that. I call it that. And in it, you got to imagine that there's a kid who is hearing everyone talk about Santa Claus. Santa Claus is coming on Christmas and going to bring all these presents. Everyone's excited. All the kids are excited. And the kid thinks, and he says on the playground, you know what? I don't think Santa Claus is real. And the other kids say, why? Why do you think that? And he says, well, I don't know. I can't put my finger on it, but, how does he visit every house in the world on Christmas night? How does he make reindeer fly? Reindeer can't fly. It's scientifically proven. How does he know? Keep an eye on every kid in the world all the time. How does he produce all those toys? And the other kids say, well, I know that sounds good, but my parents say he's real. You go to the mall, you see him around Christmas time. I sat on his lap. Government even tracks him on Christmas, where he's going. So they talk about it on TV. So what are you saying? All of these people are participating in a conspiracy? And that kid is left, being just a little kid saying, I don't know. I don't know. All I know is that reindeer don't fly. And that Santa Claus from that can't possibly be real. Well, the same applies here. 105 feet of free fall, Building 7 on 9/11. Not possible unless you have explosives. The lack of deceleration on the tower, Twin Towers. Not possible unless somebody's blowing it away from below. The evidence is there, folks. The evidence is there. So even though we can't pinpoint who exactly did it, exactly how it was done, we know enough to know we are being lied to. And look at the fruits of the official story. Again, we were talking about the torture report. What it's done to our society. So this is why it's so important. Again, this is why I bring up torture on Christmas. And the fact that people choose not to listen to this, the fact that they don't want to hear this, that they just want to be happy, just enjoy your life. Don't think about negative things, is a consequence of the official story. It's the post-9/11 world at work. Or the fact that people just ignore this evidence. I've told this story. This is another thing we can relate to Christmas. When I was a kid, my bedroom was right next to my parents' bedroom. And each Christmas, this is back when I still believed in Santa Claus, it would be around, because we'd go to my aunt's house on Christmas Eve, then we'd come back, and it would be like, oh, you better get to bed, because Santa's going to be coming. Okay, all right. So I'd go to bed. My parents would stay up for a little while, put the TV on. We didn't have cable, so they didn't really have a big selection to watch, just with 3 channels, because half those channels would turn off at 1 in the morning. Remember those days? But they would be up doing something, hanging out in the living room. And so I would lay there in bed, and I wasn't trying to stay awake, but just from natural excitement of being a kid, you're just not falling asleep. So I'd be laying there in bed, and then my father would appear in the doorway, and he would say, Andy, are you asleep? I'd be like, no, Dad, I'm still awake. I'm still up, waiting for Santa Claus is going to come in the morning. And he'd be like, well, you need to go to bed right now. Then my mom would appear, and she goes, is he in bed yet? I'm like, no, Mom. She's like, well, you need to fall asleep. You don't want to be awake when Santa comes. He might not come back next year if you do that. That's what they used to always tell me. And I guess eventually I'd fall asleep, but sometimes I wouldn't. Sometimes I would just kind of close my eyes to make myself fall asleep. And then I would hear noises. I would hear walking, my parents walking from their bedroom past my door out into the living room. And I would hear a distinctive crinkling of presents. And in my mind, deep down, very bowels of your thoughts where truth resides, I knew that they were the Christmas presents. I knew that in one instant, Santa Claus was a big hoax, and my parents were really the ones buying the presents, and they were carrying them out right now. And that's why they were so interested in me going to sleep right away, because they just wanted to get these presents laid out and go to bed. I knew that, but I chose not to pay attention to that. I chose not to hear that crinkling. I chose to put it out of my mind because it was a bummer. Because I didn't want to accept that at such a young age. I wanted to believe in the myth. And this is what Americans are doing now. When they watch Building 7 come down. Watching Building 7 come down is the crinkling of the presents. And they keep their eyes tightly closed just like I did on those Christmas Eve nights. Because they don't want to break the illusion. And in this case, it's more dire. Because it's not just holding on to an illusion of a mythical phantom that brings presents every year. It's just like an exciting thing that you want to believe in. All right. This myth, challenges the foundation on which people stand in their relationship with their country. Everything they believe about the world. It puts their understanding of the entire world in jeopardy. On a more drastic level, because there are consequences, no doubt. Obviously, it's good for America. It makes America better, but there's some pain to come with it. Obviously, with a cover-up this large, there'll be prosecutions once the truth comes forward, once it's fully acknowledged. People just don't want to deal with it. But it's important that they deal with it, because otherwise we end up with a populace saying, hey, well, if you want to threaten to kill somebody's children, unless they tell you what you want to hear, hey, if it gets good intelligence, why not? Now, I wanted to talk about this, too, tonight. Why it is so important. Obviously, I've covered that, why it's so important. We talked about the torture report. We talk about the consequences of the post 9/11 world every week. I talked about it last week when Richard Gage and Kelly David were on. I asked about the side effects of our work and how talking about this essentially spray paints the words "Remember Building 7" on the messages of the people trying to push agendas now. But it's also important to approach this issue in a responsible way. And in my notes here, I called this The Art of 9/11 Truth, kind of modeling it after Sun Tzu's The Art of War, which is a book everyone should read, or at least listen to. You can go on the LibriVox.org and download an MP3 of it and listen to it while you work. The Art of War. It's very simple. Very short, too. Just some common sense stuff that you can apply to fighting a war. And I don't necessarily mean a violent war either, just to fighting an intellectual war as well, like we do with this show, like we do at AE 9/11 Truth. But I call this the art of 9/11 truth, and you can take it or leave it. I don't hold myself up as an expert on anything. I don't put myself up on a pedestal. However, I do think I know a few things about this particular subject. Now, the first thing that's very important is to stick to what you can prove, and don't go off into speculation or into hearsay. Now, what is hearsay? That's a term that we hear thrown around a lot, and we don't necessarily, all of us, know what it means. So hearsay is this. Hearsay is evidence in an out-of-court statement introduced to prove the truth of the matter asserted therein. This is from Wikipedia. But they give these examples. For example, to prove Tom was in town, the attorney asks a witness, "What did Susan tell you about Tom being in town?" Since the witness's answer will rely on an out-of-court statement that Susan made, Susan is not available for cross-examination. And it is to prove the truth that Tom was in town. It is hearsay. A justification for the objection is that the person who made the statement is not in court and thus insulated from cross-examination. And then there's also double hearsay. Double hearsay is a statement that contains another hearsay statement itself. So basically, it's like saying, some guy told me that he was there on 9/11 and he saw guys setting the charges. This is very different. Now, if you have an actual witness there who saw it themselves, if they were in court, they'd be put under oath, or if they're on a show of yours, doing a podcast, for instance, they are putting on the record. They're putting their name to the record that this is what they saw. And of course, witnesses are okay. They're admissible in court. All right, they'd be called to the stand and put on account. The 118 first responders who heard explosions on 9/11. That's not hearsay. They're putting their name right to it. It's in the oral histories. All right, but if you say that somebody told you, folks, look, doing this work, 9/11 Truth, doing this show, doing what I do with AE 9/11 Truth, and I talk to people, I hear all sorts of stories. Stuff that could cause a huge stir and get everyone all excited, but I can't prove any of them. Or I can't say I can't prove any of them. There's a lot of them I can't, because they depend on what somebody told somebody. For instance, I knew somebody that said he was involved with shooting down Flight 93. Wow, that sounds intriguing. Will he talk to me? No, I can't even tell you his name. Well, I can't do nothing with that. You might as well have told me nothing. Absolutely nothing. So, I'm not going to, I'm throwing this out as an example of hearsay evidence, but I'm not going to talk about these things publicly, because I know that our detractors are going to say exactly what I just said. That's just hearsay. You can't prove that. And rightly so. And that's another thing, too, that's important to avoid doing. Don't base evidence on what you think somebody's reaction should be to a particular event. And there's a difference between evidence and what qualifies as just weird. Like, let me use an example. Let me use an example related to 9/11. Bush sitting in the classroom reading My Pet Goat while the nation is under attack is weird. And certainly it's something to take note of and keep in your mind, but it's not evidence of anything. I've heard people use this as an example of why, they think Bush was involved in 9/11. They say, because, he sat in there because he knew it was happening. Well, no, you don't know that. You have no idea what was going through the man's head as he sat there in that classroom. All right, you can watch him on camera, but you don't know what's going on in that skull. All you know is what happened. So you can classify that in the weird category. Yeah, that is odd. I would like to think that if I were president and I knew that we were under attack, that I would have found a tactful way to get out of that classroom, that I would have said, I want to thank your teacher for having me. I have to go attend to something that's been brought to my attention, but thank you so much, and you guys keep on learning. Very simple. You wouldn't have to run from the room. But It's not that hard to appease children, folks. So again, it's weird, but it doesn't classify as any kind of evidence of anything. You can't get into somebody's head. Now, there is something that I personally call instinctive evidence. Sometimes when there's a certain look on somebody's face, something that they say, some kind of subtle interaction that might catch your attention. It's like in that movie Doubt. I talked about it on the show, where the nun suspects that the priest is sexually abusing the children at the school where they both work. Her suspicions are based just off of an interaction she witnessed between the priest and a young boy. I forgot exactly what the interaction was. It might have been the priest putting his hand on his shoulder. I don't know, but this is what I'm talking about. Instinctive evidence. And I shouldn't say evidence because it doesn't qualify as evidence. It's just something that sticks in your brain, in your heart, where you just get that feeling something's wrong. And there's a lot of that related to 9/11, but it doesn't qualify necessarily as evidence. It wouldn't hold up in court. Where instinctive evidence, and I don't know if I'll keep on saying evidence in this term, but what it's good for doing is for jolting your personal instincts to research more. For instance, let's say you're at a company party, or your spouse's company party, rather. And you see your wife and a coworker, and there's just something about the way that they look at each other, something about the way that they hug greet, that just makes you feel there's something wrong there. Now, if you go out and start accusing your wife of having an affair, you're going to look crazy if she denies it. All right, so the smart thing to do is get some evidence, real evidence. Figure out some way that you can prove it before you confront her with it. And it's good to keep that kind of quote-unquote instinctive evidence to yourself until you can actually prove it. Because then again, if your enemy knows that you're coming, then they'll guard against it. It's like in war. You don't announce what city you're going to attack. You just do it. And then gloat about it afterwards. That's a smart thing to do. But again, quote-unquote instinctive evidence is good for just jolting your instincts, and it's good for personal survival. I mean, there's certain things that you don't have to justify to other people. I remember I was in China, and me and 2 other people are walking down a road, and there happened to be another American with a Chinese woman who came up and greeted us, and we got talking to them, and I don't know, there was just something off about this guy. And then he said something. I was zoning out. I was in my own world. Actually, the other 2 people I was with were talking to them. And remember, these are just strangers we just met off of the street like 5 minutes before. But then the guy says something like, oh, you want to see a demonstration? And so I'm just, again, lost in my own world. I'm kind of following my group, and we're heading towards some dark, dingy alley. And all of a sudden, my spidey senses kick in, and I just said, no, we got to go meet so-and-so at a certain thing. We don't have time for this. And the other 2 people I was with didn't know what I was talking about, but I just essentially had to go bull my way into a leadership of the situation and just say, no, we can't do this. We're gone. Now, was that guy planning anything nefarious? I don't know, but it was just a feeling I got in the pit of my stomach that we do not want to follow this person down this alley. And we got out of there, and I explained this later. Like, I'm not following this guy these people down some alley. We don't know them. We don't know our way around here. And my friends saw the wisdom of this when I pointed it out. But in circumstances like that, you don't need to prove anything when it involves your own survival. And it just involves you, and you're not accusing anybody of anything. You're just getting out of a situation. So it's good for that kind of situation, but it doesn't qualify as evidence. Just feeling that Bush was involved, that Cheney was involved, doesn't qualify as proving it. And I think a lot of this audience knows that, but again, this is just to state it. And a good rule of thumb is to verify something and have it in front of you before you state it as a fact. And demand that core evidence. There was a video I watched on the internet. Again, I don't just research 9/11. I research all sorts of stuff. I've had other websites. I was watching some cool YouTube video on subliminal messages in cigarette ads. And this person was reading stuff supposedly from a leaked advertising manual. Sounds good, sounds great. However, I could not find a copy of this leaked advertising manual online. So, again, I can't really cite anything. Because for all I know, this person could be making up everything that they're putting in this video. I like to think they're not, but I don't know. That's the responsible way to approach issues, especially 9/11. Because in a case like that, your detractors are going to say, where is the source? And rightfully so. They have a right to demand that. And so you need to produce that. Now this is another one too. If something is too wild to be true, it probably is. Or there's a simple explanation. I remember a few years ago, there was this claim on the internet. Probably more than a few years ago. I think this is when I was first waking up to this. That nobody who died in the World Trade Center is listed in the Social Security Death Index. Oh my God, that sounds alarming. That sounds shocking. What the heck? What's the deal here? What's going on? Nobody's in the Social Security Death Index. And you do the research for yourself. There's some webpage Social Security has. You can type in, get a list of victims' names and type it in. They're not coming up. Wait, these people are dead, right? There were some people got excited about this. Well, you apply a little bit of common sense after a minute, and you realize that nobody who died was probably collecting any Social Security. Because if they were collecting Social Security, that would mean that they were either retired or disabled, and therefore not in the Twin Towers. That was the claim, is that nobody in the Twin Towers. Well, why would they be in the Twin Towers? The people in the Twin Towers were at work. People didn't live there. So of course they wouldn't be listed in the death index because they had never been receiving Social Security benefits. So those accounts wouldn't have to be closed out. So there's a very reasonable explanation for that. So when something seems really wild, it's probably not true or there's a good explanation. I remember a couple of years ago too, there's a video of World Trade Center 7 where it shows the windows blowing out as it gets ready to go down. I mean, it looks too good to be true. And that's because it was a hoax. It was a hoax video. But it looks so good and so realistic that it makes you wonder. I mean, you're like, is this what I'm really seeing? Because I mean, this is what this video, the way they show this. I mean, there would be no denying it once you see this video if this were a real video. But it's not. It was a hoax. Now, this is another important one. Stop obsessing over who is a disinfo agent and basically just verify the information and do your own activism. I see people get lost down this rabbit hole all of the time. Everyone pointing fingers at people who have a difference of opinion than them on the way 9/11 was done. Well, this person must be a disinfo agent. I'm not saying those don't exist either, because there's some people putting out some really crazy stuff that I find it hard to believe that they could be that wacky, that bonkers, without having a motive. But I don't focus on that. I don't try to give those people attention. I just focus on what I can prove and do my own activist work. And I've heard Alex Jones say this, don't focus on who you think is bad or who you think is good. You know yourself you're good, that you're for real, and so do the work yourself. Focus on what you yourself know to be true. Not on this witch hunt on who's real, who's not, who's fake opposition. Because what does it really matter? If you don't agree with their information, just disprove the information. I mean, ultimately, unless you have actual evidence of that, you don't know. Someone could just be bonkers. Now, David Chandler, a couple of years ago, put out a really good video. Actually, it was last year, not even a couple of years ago. Put out a great video where he outlines essentially what he calls 3+1 points to stick to in this debate. All right, the evidence proving that these were controlled demolitions on 9/11 that we witnessed in New York. So we'll start with the 3, and then we'll get to the +1. There's 1 is the dynamics of the way that the buildings came down. We talk about that all the time. The free fall of Building 7, the Twin Towers, lack of deceleration of the top block, visible squibs, all of that stuff. You can listen to that in the archives. We also have the fires and the temperatures. The fact that the jet fuel in office furniture can't get hot enough to melt steel, but melted steel is documented. Partially evaporated according to FEMA. All right, so that's the second point to stick to. And 3 is the fact that we found, well, I didn't, but that an independent team of scientists led by Niels Harrit, interviewed him a few weeks ago, found traces of nanothermite in the World Trade Center dust. They lay it out in a paper. Been peer-reviewed. So these are 3 points to stick to, proving it was a controlled demolition. All of this other stuff associated with 9/11 will follow if you can get the general public to acknowledge controlled demolition. And this is where our activism should be focused. This is what people should be bringing to the attention of people in power, the political representatives, the law enforcement authorities. Now the +1 that David Chandler lists, and he kind of goes it from an inside job angle, but he basically talks about the media cover-up too. And now, this is me saying this, while you don't want to speculate on what is going on in someone's head, it is okay to make note of weird peculiarities. For example, the media's refusal to talk about the evidence that AE brings to the table, unless you bring some pressure to the media. They don't want to talk about it. Or they will do their typical thing where they want to call you a conspiracy theorist. Put that image in people's minds instead of letting the evidence just be presented and letting the public decide for themselves. All right. It's another peculiarity that it's okay to focus on is why won't NIST release the World Trade Center 7 data for the computer models? Why do they say that doing so would jeopardize public safety? That's bizarre. That's crazy. Why won't NIST test for explosives? You thought that would have been done anyway. It's a part of the fire investigation manual, one of the recommendations. But they didn't do it. And so a good question to NIST would be, why wouldn't you do it? Why don't you do it now? I mean, they don't have some samples of World Trade Center dust sitting somewhere? You could take this even beyond the 9/11 controlled demolition. Why won't they release the photos of bin Laden killed in the raid in Abbottabad, or any video of it, when they release the photos of the other 2 guys killed? Things like that. And it doesn't throw any accusations, it just asks a very simple question. Like on C-SPAN, we'd ask congressmen, how do you account for Building 7's free fall without explosives being used? Well, I think you're a conspiracy theorist. That would be their answer. I mean, they had different ways of saying it each time, but that was their standard answer until the pressure continued and they started getting warned that they'd get a Building 7 question. And then people pick up on this. And so you're not accusing anyone of anything. You're not speculating on what's going on in somebody's head. You're simply asking a question and getting an answer. And if it's a bad answer, again, the public will pick up on it. Now, whether or not they choose to look at it, whether or not they choose to be like me with the Christmas presents and the crinkling paper, that's going to be up to them. But they aren't going to be able to do that for long if we keep up the pressure. Eventually, they will grow up. Eventually, they will learn that there's no Santa Claus. Reality will catch up with them. So these are the things to stick to. Again, the way the buildings came down, the temperatures, the nanothermite, and then to pick up on peculiarities. Why NIST won't release information. Why is the media so eager to cover it up? And right there, you have people's eyes open. Right there is enough to justify a new investigation, without having easily shot down arguments by the other side that basically just argues about whether or not somebody meant something when they said this, or what they were thinking during a particular moment. Because you can't prove any of that. Now, it is Christmas, and we're coming into the last 10 minutes of the show, so I do want to end it with some positive kind of uplifting message, and I think we can, because there's a lot of positive things. I mean, something that I don't want to do with this show, and I don't know how well I'm succeeding. You can give me some feedback on that, but I'd like to think that I'm giving some kind of a positive outlook on our future in this show. I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff going on, and there's a lot of consequences if we don't get the public to wake up and face reality and at least demand a new investigation into the destruction of the 3 towers on 9/11. But there are a lot of good things. It's not good to be doom and gloom all of the time. Now, I've talked about it before, these people who say they're going to wait for some kind of civil war to start before they're going to take action. That they're not going to go call C-SPAN or, well, the C-SPAN campaign's over, but they're not going to go hang flyers. They're not going to participate in this activity or talk to this group of architects because, oh, that's not going to do nothing. You got to wait for the shooting to start. Well, that's crazy. All right? And nobody wants violence. I've known people, Bosnians, who have lived through that kind of thing, and it's not fun. It's not camping out in the woods with your buddies. It gets old really quick. All right? It devastates a society. It affects that society for hundreds of years afterwards. And besides, even if you think that you can handle that, there's no civil war, there's no leadership, there's no Continental Congress, there's no individual states breaking away. All right, so what these people are essentially talking about is just chaos and anarchy, something that nobody wants. And it sucks up a lot of energy, too, when you're worried all of the time, waiting for the sky to fall. And science itself is such a miracle, such an exciting thing. I mean, it's like a knife. Obviously, it can be used for evil. It can be used to make the atomic bomb, or it can be used to keep your lights on at a lower cost. It depends on us, but what we're doing is so important with 9/11 Truth, 9/11 Science Truth, because it protects the integrity of science. And that's an important thing. I say this statement every week, 2 + 2 = 4, not 5 because the government tells you to. When you're allowed to speak the truth, when you're allowed to have normal debates without some loudmouth from Fox News shouting you down for talking about science and common sense, good things come from it. I mean, look at the gains we're making towards civilian spaceflight. Yeah, I know that Virgin Galactic had a major tragedy with a spaceflight blowing up, but that's going to happen as you make progress, and I'm not trivializing the tragedy there, but there's going to be mistakes made. But eventually, if they're allowed to progress, they're going to do great things. All right, civilian spaceflight, think about what that'll do for mankind. If you can get from one place to another quicker, if you can go into outer space, how cool that will be. What will be the next thing after that? We'll have the kind of future that we were promised growing up. I'm kind of disappointed. I was promised all of these cool things. They never came to be. Advances in robotics. Now, how this is used and whether or not it'll be good for mankind will depend on mankind itself. But there's a lot of good things that could come from robotics. I mean, if you could essentially have a farm where you had robots working for you, growing your own food, we could return to an agricultural society, agricultural-based society with more people self-reliant, doing their own trade, farmers markets, those types of things. I mean, that could come from it. But there's so many miracles that could come from science curing diseases. That's why it's so important to protect science's integrity, to not let the government just come in and change certain provable facts because they have an agenda that they want to push, that they have a crime that they want to cover up. So there's a lot of good things to look forward to. We just have to get this monkey off of our back. The post-9/11 world stems from 9/11 itself, the fake official story of what happened to the towers in New York. With one fell swoop, we can knock it all out. With one fell swoop, we can have a better future. So that's the message I want to leave you with on this Christmas evening. All right, that's going to end another episode of 9/11 Freefall. Remember, this program's on every Thursday night at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. You can also download MP3s of this show from the Internet Archive by going to 911freefall.com. This is Andy Steele saying have a great week and Merry Christmas.
As clear as the evidence is for the destruction of Building 7 by explosives, the evidence is even more clear in the case of the Twin Towers. When you look at it with a new pair of glasses and looking at the forensic science-based evidence, does it look like a gravitational collapse to you? What about those floors, those pancakes? This is a pancake collapse. We're looking for some pancakes down at the loaf. But what I'm looking for is 110 floors with this kind of metal decking underneath 4 and 5 inches thick of concrete. An acre in size, each of them. 110 acres of these. How many floors do we find down at the bottom? Not 50, not 10, not even 1. We don't even find metal decking down there. Or concrete. There's hardly any macroscopic chunks of concrete. What happened to the metal decking? What happened to the concrete? And this dust made it almost across to New Jersey, across the river. Thick, billowing, laying a carpet of 4 or 6 inches thick around lower Manhattan, pulverized to 100 micron to 10 mil particles, almost like talcum powder, some of it. It's very, very fine. Where's the grinder that produced this? 90,000 tons of it. In these clouds that expanded 10 times the volume of the buildings themselves in just 30 seconds. Now, the available gravitational potential in the whole building is about 110,000 kilowatt hours. That's basically the weight of the building times its height above the ground, evened out. But the expansion of these clouds has been calculated to require about 10 times that energy in heat, which produces that expansion. So we have a problem here. 700 bone fragments, a half an inch long, found on top of the skyscraper across the street. Think about that one. There were 2,749 victims, but only 300 whole bodies were found. 20,000 pieces of bodies found. 6,000 small enough to fit into a test tube. 1,100 victims completely unaccounted for. In other words, no pieces large enough to gain any DNA from, vaporized. 200 pieces were matched to one single person. Can fire and a gravitational collapse account for this massive pulverization of people? Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth are at the apex of the 9/11 Truth movement. Why? Because we have those who have the necessary credibility to raise eyebrows and gain attention. We need to act. The power of truth is greater than the power of the lie. So get informed and begin to let the truth speak through you.